Welcome to my channel of Gill Master Stories. Don't forget to subscribe button and press on the bell icon for more inspiration and mind-blowing stories. It was supposed to be a dream honeymoon, vacation into marital bliss, but that dream would turn into a nightmare when a newlywed bride was beaten to death at the hands of her husband in February of 2020. To Christy Chen and Bradley Robert Dawson exchanged their ID. According to the Associated Press, Chen worked as a pastry chef before returning to school to become a pharmacist, while her husband worked in the IT department at a children's welfare nonprofit. The two appeared to have their whole life together ahead of them, that is until the Memphis couple went on their honeymoon. The couple went to an exclusive resort in Fiji that just so happened to be the exact same resort where the 1980 flick The Blue Lagoon, starring Brooke Shields, was filmed, while the Turtle Island luxury resort offered private villas, gourmet meals, and a personal concierge. It ended up being the scene of a heinous crime. On July 9th of 2020, Christy was found dead lying in a pool of her own blood inside a bungalow. The horrific discovery was made by resort staff. Officials say she had multiple blunt force injuries to her head. However, her husband was nowhere to be found, and the finger appeared to point toward Dawson as being responsible. A lawyer for Christ's family said the couple was arguing the night before over dinner, and it wasn't until the following afternoon, when the couple missed their breakfast and lunch, that staff discovered Christ's body. According to reports, by the time her body was discovered, her husband fled on a kayak from the resort to another island, only taking his wallet as well as passport, but leaving behind his phone and watch, which had GPS on it. Authorities were able to track Dawson down 36 hours later. According to the attorney for Christ's family, he got stuck on a remote island. Meanwhile, Dawson's lawyer previously told the Associated Press his client left the resort because he panicked and was in shock about losing his wife. Despite his so-called shock, he was thrown in jail in Fiji, charged with his wife's murder. But for Christ's family, her death was not only horrific, but they were unable to bring her home and back to the States. Her body was beaten so badly she couldn't be embalmed for her remains to be returned to the United States. Instead, she had to be cremated. Dawson pleaded not guilty to his wife's shocking death, claiming it was an accident, but it would take 2 years before the former groom would go on trial, all while remaining on the island. The trial itself took place in Fiji and lasted about a week. When the judge issued his ruling, he reportedly said he was satisfied beyond reasonable doubt that Dawson and no one else was responsible for Christy's death. He reportedly said when issuing the ruling for the offer, said reasons, "I am of the opinion that the defense's version cannot be believed and the same version is rejected. Having analyzed all the evidence in its totality, I am of the opinion that the prosecution witnesses were all truthful, credible, and reliable in their testimony. From the totality of the evidence, I am satisfied the prosecution has disproved the defense of provocation. Having considered all the evidence in its totality, I am of the opinion that the prosecution has proved the charge of murder against the accused beyond reasonable doubt. Now convicted in Fiji, Dawson likely won't be returning to Memphis, Tennessee anytime soon, as he faces a mandatory life sentence. I'm joined now by former prosecutor and criminal defense attorney Florina Schiller. Florina, thank you so much for joining me today. You know, I want to get your reaction to this case. Overall, it's pretty horrific given the level of brutality this husband committed to his own wife, his new bride. What do you make of this overall? Yeah, horrific is the appropriate word for this. This is a newlywed couple on their honeymoon. Appears to be this picture perfect wedding picture, perfect marriage picture, perfect honeymoon in Fiji of all places. And he brutally beats her to death. I think what this tells us is what most of us already know, is that people's lives are not as they appear. What we see on social media, what we see on Instagram, that is a highlight reel of the happy moments, and behind those happy moments, unfortunately, there is a lot of anger, a lot of frustration, and some very real problems. And what do you make of the defendant calling this an accident? You know, given the level of brutality to the point, you know the victim here is lying in a pool of her own blood, you know, at this bungalow. What do you make of him just saying to his lawyer, oh, this was an accident? Every person accused of a crime is allowed to put on a defense and say and afforded an opportunity to a trial for a determination to be made as to whether or not they're guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. The accident defense in this case clearly was not a good one and did not work, and the determination was made that he's guilty because he did, in fact, commit this crime beyond a reasonable doubt. I think that every defendant shouldn't be criticized for putting on a defense. That's a right that they have. But in this case, the defense of accident was not a well thought out one, not a good one, and did not match what the facts appear to have been based on the evidence. And I think this case also stands out not just because this had happened at this luxury resort over in this beautiful island in Fiji, but also because, you know, this woman Christ was battered so badly, again lying in a pool of her own blood. But she also, because of the extensive injuries to her body, she had to be cremated as a result because she couldn't be embalmed to be sent back to the United States. What do you make of just that level of brutality to the point her family had to fly her ashes back to the United States as opposed to her body and giving her a proper burial? Anytime there's a homicide that is the result of a severe beating or a stabbing with, you know, numerous stab wounds, violence that is just horrendous, it clearly suggests to me that this is something that is done from a severely detached emotional state, an emotional state where the person is acting out of anger, out of rage, and clearly here out of control, right? Somebody who does not have the impulse control necessary to pause, step back, and not do something like this. It's like a switch went off and there was no stopping, and he beat her so badly that he completely disfigured her to the point where she can't even have a proper burial. And I'm not saying that him acting emotionally is an excuse. I'm not saying that him acting emotionally should in any way lower the sentence that he's going to be facing. What I'm saying is this is not somebody who acted in a calm, reasonable, logical way, and certainly I don't know that any murderer does, but there are different types of murders. There's unplanned, calculated murders, there's murders from a gunshot, there's murders from a single stabbing, there's accidental deaths. This is none of those. This is a righteously enraged man for whatever reason, and we don't know what they argued about. We don't know what enraged him, but this is somebody who clearly became enraged and acted impulsively and heinously and brutally. And Bradley Dawson, he's never had a criminal record by according to reports. But do you think that this was a random act of violence toward his wife? Or do you think, you know, like many of the other cases that we see here, that, you know, he's been violent with her possibly before, and we don't know all of the facts? But what I could tell you, generally speaking, with cases of domestic violence, there's cycles of abuse and there's progression, and so on. Batterers don't just beat people to a bloody pulp for the first time out of nowhere. It might start with verbal abuse. There's a honeymoon period, then it escalates to maybe pushing, shoving, hitting. Then there's another making up period. Then it might escalate to hitting more severely. Then again there's a make-up period, and it goes in these cycles. And throughout the cycles, the abuse, the physical abuse will escalate. And that's why many times courts across the country will take what people might consider more minor acts of violence, a slap, a shove. They will take those cases very seriously, because often times that single slap or that single shove, which in and of itself is not a felony level assault, there might not even be a true injury. Obviously there's an emotional injury, there might be some redness, there might be some swelling, but it's not a broken bone, right? It's not a stab wound. But courts take those very seriously, because those are often the beginning steps of that domestic violence cycle that can erupt and that can lead to a homicide. And we really just don't know whether it's something that's going to result in a homicide tomorrow or 5 years from now. And so these cases between intimate partners have this emotional volatility that can cause people who are otherwise law-abiding citizens with no criminal history to act in the most violent, brutal way possible, and so it's really important to detect domestic violence early on, to attempt to intervene early on, and to encourage people, if anyone knows anyone who's in an abusive relationship, to leave as early as possible, because you really just never know when that point will come, when that break point will come, where the slap or the shove or the kick goes further and results in a brutal beating that results in a death. And I think, we can kind of possibly point to the aftermath as well, to whereas if he really cared about what had happened to his wife, if it truly was an accident, like he had said, that he wouldn't have gone on a kayak and fled from the hotel, or the resort I should say, and try to go to another island, only leaving his phone at the hotel, his GPS watch, but then taking his passport with him and again fleeing on a kayak, only to get a mile away before authorities were called on him. But what do you make of the aftermath of him doing that? It does not make sense. It does not comport with this alleged defense that he put forward. Obviously, you are newly married on your honeymoon at this beautiful resort, and your wife is dead. Not just dead, not passed out unconscious, not had a medical emergency, dead, but dead, brutally beaten, and you don't call for aid, you don't notify anyone, you don't call 911, you don't seek help, you leave her and you leave on a kayak. That makes zero sense, and the only thing it explains is that he does not care, and suggests rather strongly that he had something to do with this, or more bluntly was the cause of this. And now that he is convicted, the sentencing in Fiji is a little bit different, but it appears that Bradley Dawson could face the rest of his life in prison in Fiji. What's your reaction to that? That it would be an absolutely appropriate sentence. We're dealing with a different country, different laws, a different judicial system, but anybody who murders anybody, and in particular a spouse who murders their new spouse in a brutal way such as this, should absolutely face life in prison. No, this isn't a crime that we can easily forgive or easily mitigate to a lower sentence, but his sentence is now in the hands of that Fiji court, and the judge will make that determination at the appropriate time. All right, Lena Schiller, I want to thank you so much for your time and insight into this case. Before we sign you off, is there anything else you'd like to add? For all of our viewers, if anybody knows anybody who is in a situation where they are concerned of domestic violence, speak to that person, let them know that you support them, and let them know that they can come to you in their time of need. It is so important to offer resources and be available to help, so that people who are in domestic violence situations have an opportunity to leave, and to leave early on, so that something like this does not happen. Florina Allaire, again, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. Thank you for having me. Bradley Dawson's sentencing is slated for January, while he faces a mandatory of life in prison. BG law reportedly permits the judge to set a minimum term to be served before a pardon is considered. Reporting for Law and Crime, I'm Elizabeth Milner. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. For more content, please leave your comments and share your experiences. Thank you for being part of Gill Master Stories community. See you soon.